All right, let's get right into it. We're going to talk about something huge, a really startling shift happening in the American economy. And this is something that, one way or another, touches pretty much all of us. And no, that's not just some dramatic headline. It's the real, hard conclusion from a ton of research. Think about it. The very idea of the American middle class, the foundation of prosperity for decades, it's just crumbling.
So here's a great way to picture what's happening. Imagine the country's income distribution used to look like a one-humped camel. A big, healthy hump right in the middle where most people lived comfortably. Well, that hump has basically collapsed. And now what we have is a two-humped camel. We're splitting into two very different groups, the wealthy and, well, everyone else.
All right, that's a powerful image, right? But let's look at the actual numbers that back it up.
Okay, before we get into the big chart, let's just anchor ourselves with one number. All this data we're about to see is from 2014, and back then, the median family income in the US was right around $60,000. Just keep that number in your head, because it's the middle point where everything starts to pull apart. And here it is. This chart from the Pew Research Center, it tells the whole story. Look at 1970. The middle class took home a whopping 62% of all the income in the nation. They were the dominant force. Now, fast forward to 2014. That share, it crashed down to just 43%. So you got to ask, where did all that money go? I mean, that's almost 20% of the entire country's income. And the chart is crystal clear. It went straight to the top. The upper income share ballooned from 29% to 49%. The middle wasn't just squeezed, it was hollowed out.
So, how on earth did this happen? Well, to make sense of it, economists have a framework, and it's called the dual economy model.
Now, what's fascinating is that this model, it wasn't even designed for a country like the US. It was originally created by an economist named W. Arthur Lewis to explain what happens in developing nations, where you've got a poor, rural part of the country and a modern industrial part. The fact that we can now apply this model to the United States, that's what's so shocking. It suggests we're starting to look a lot more like a developing country than we'd like to admit.
So what do these two sectors look like here today? Well, on one side, you've got the upper sector. These are your college-educated folks, high skills, high wages. Then you've got the lower sector, and this is where things get rough. Low skills, low wages, and really precarious work. Think about gig workers, independent contractors who don't get any benefits. And here's a really crucial part of this model. It suggests that the upper sector has an interest in keeping the wages in that lower sector down. It's part of how the system functions.
Okay, so that's the economic engine behind this split. But you can't just look at the economics in a vacuum, right? To really get the full picture, you have to see how all of this plays out in the world of politics.
And this is where things get really confusing, right? It raises this huge question. In a democracy, where the majority is supposed to rule, why don't all the people in that lower sector just vote the wealthy out of power? There are way more of them.
Well, the answer, as it so often does in America, goes way back. It's deeply tangled up in our history with race. You can trace a line from a labor system built on slavery, through the Civil War, and even after the Civil Rights Movement made overt racism unacceptable, that division didn't just disappear. Instead, politicians got smarter. They started using coded language, a kind of dog whistle, to stir up those same old divisions without saying the quiet part out loud.
Bob Dylan absolutely nailed this way back in 1963. He sang about how race has always been the wedge, the tool used to keep poor white Americans from realizing that their economic problems are fundamentally the same as those of poor people of color. It stops them from teaming up.
And this division isn't just an abstract political theory. It has real, devastating consequences that feed on each other, creating a vicious cycle that's incredibly hard to break. The legal scholar Michelle Alexander has a name for this whole system, the new Jim Crow. And it's so important to understand. This isn't just about people in prison. It's about an entire web of laws and public policies that systematically traps huge chunks of the population.
And this really lays out how that cycle works. It starts with mass incarceration, right? That tears families apart, leaving communities strained. That, in turn, weakens the local tax base, which leads directly to underfunded city schools. And what happens when schools are failing? They produce graduates who have very few good job opportunities, which makes them vulnerable and can lead them right back into the system that ends in prison. It just feeds itself, over and over.
And if you want to see just how unequal this system is, look at these numbers. The lifetime chance of going to prison for a man born in 2001. For a white man, it's 1 in 17. For a Hispanic man, 1 in 6. And for a black man, it is an unbelievable 1 in 3. Just let that sink in. 1 in 3.
And look, this isn't just a problem for one group of people. This kind of systemic neglect, it ends up affecting everyone. We see it creating a two-tiered education system. You know, shiny, well-funded schools in the suburbs and crumbling, failing schools in the cities. And we all feel the effects of decaying public infrastructure. I mean, think about our roads, our bridges, our public transit systems. They're falling apart because of this.
So, we've seen the data. We've looked at the economic model. We've talked about the devastating consequences. It all leads to the one big question. What happens next? Where is all of this going?
You know, the source material we've been pulling from really sums it up with a powerful metaphor. Think of it this way. A large, thriving middle class was the goose that laid the golden eggs for America in the 20th century. That's what created all that prosperity. The policies we've been talking about, the ones that hollowed out the middle class, they are essentially killing the goose that laid the golden eggs.
And so that's the thought we're left with. It's a pretty urgent one. The path we're on seems pretty clear. The real challenge for everyone is to ask, can we change this path? Can we somehow save the goose that laid the golden eggs?